Okay, I think we can start now. Good morning and good evening, everyone, depending on where you are joining from. Before we begin, I would like to give a brief background to our forum. This forum was started by the students of the Department of Comparative Literature and India Studies at the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. Since its inception in 2018, we have been organizing sessions regularly, mostly in online format. The student-led initiative provides an academic space for, just a second. Yeah, it provides a space for dialogue, exchange and critical reflection, bringing together scholars from diverse disciplines and research interests. The research forum, now named Narrating Difference, continues to strive in its efforts to invite and host people across disciplines, borders, and perspectives. To facilitate that, we also have a mailing list where you can sign up by entering your details if you want to receive regular updates from our forum. And if you want to present your work or ideas on our platform, we'll also share our email ID and you can write to us there. I would also like to mention that this meeting is being recorded and the recording will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. Now, with these announcements aside, let me welcome our speaker for today. We have Chinmay, who is currently pursuing his PhD in comparative literature at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, prior to which he taught literature and media studies to undergraduate students at the Department of Communication Studies at Mount Carmel College, Bangalore, India. Chinmay's work has mainly been on the methodology of comparative literature. He is interested in Indian literatures, philosophy of languages, and semiotics. He speaks Marathi, Kannada, Hindi, and English, and his current work focuses on theoretical and literary formulations of what is understood to be post-coloniality. We welcome you, Chinmay. You can start your talk now, and we'll take the questions at the end of your talk.
Yeah, thank you, Shachi. Just a quick note before beginning. I was also one of the students of the Comparative and India Studies Department at FLU, Hyderabad, and I was usually in the audience section of these research forum meetings. It's weird to be presenting here, but yeah, and I think I just wanted to also say that the bit that Sachi said, that critical reflection is what we're striving to achieve. That's also something, that's basically what I think we're trying to do in today's talk. With that, I just want to start. I've also been told that I have 45 minutes, right? So I'm just going to start a timer and just give me a minute. So in case I go over or something like that, Shachi, please feel free to like come in whenever and say that, wrap up or whatever. I think most of us in the field of humanities, mainly philosophy, post-colonial studies, literary studies, know of this essay called Can the Subaltern Speak by Gayatri Spivak. We don't need to know of it, but I'm not saying that, all of us know about it, but it's controversial. And I do think that, I think there are a couple of ways usually this thing usually gets read. What I'm trying to do today is to look at the theoretical moves Spivak is doing in this piece, Spivak is pulling in this piece. And I'm trying to follow the itinerary of subject constitution, which is what she calls it, which is to trace the development of how, of the question of what constitutes a subject, right? Through Marx, Foucault, Deleuze, and then through her intervention with Sati and subaltern studies. I'd like to say at the outset that I'm not a Spivakian scholar. I don't hold any expertise in her work. It's just that I've been reading Derrida recently and Spivak, and hence this this talk. There are places where Spivak relies on a Kantian and a Hegelian formulation of history and epistemology. I won't be able to contribute or comment on those passages, specifically because I haven't read enough of Kant and enough of Hegel to contribute to that. It's also a really long essay. It's also, I think it's very important for me to say this. Just give me a minute. Uh, there are various different versions of this essay. What I'm relying on is the one that comes in this book, which is a critique of post-colonial reason towards a history of the vanishing present. Right. So this book has just 4 chapters, right? 4 really long chapters, and they're just philosophy, literature, history, culture. And Can the Subaltern Speak and other essays configure or are put in the history chapter. The history chapter itself is more than 100 pages long. Can the Subaltern Speak edition that I am referring to is around 65 pages in between those 100 pages, somewhere 100, some 100, 110 odd pages. And it's interesting because this version is the version most is heavily circulated, at least where I'm in the academic spaces I am in. And what I noticed was that in the book uh, there are already 74 or 75 footnotes that are already mentioned before the 60 pages of this essay, right? So there is a history of citation that one usually skips and then gets to this. And I'll be reading out about, and this is literally a reading of Can the Subaltern Speak, where I'm just going to be presenting quotes from her essay, and I'm going to be reading out and trying to parse through, say, 25 to 30 passages, which I feel are exemplary in her tracing of the itinerary of the question of what is a subject constitution, right? So so all disclaimers apply. We can now begin. I'm going to give a very conventional, brief biographical information about this person, Gayatri Spivak. Indian Bengali. She's 83, I think now 84 years old. That might be inaccurate. She might be 84. I'm not exactly sure. She's famously, she always says that she's not a South Asianist. She teaches German, French, and English history, theory, and philosophy at Columbia. She is mostly associated with the following people: Marx and Derrida, and these other academic formations of the Subaltern Studies Collective and feminism. She also founded the Institute of Comparative Literature at Columbia. I also want to talk briefly about her work in India and Africa and the flack she usually gets. Again, as I said, this is not a defense of Spivak. Ideally, I wouldn't want this conversation to be, is Chinmay defending Spivak, or is he for or against, but rather that bit that Shachi said about critical reflection is what I'd like to do, to trace that itinerary of the subject constitution, right? She's been doing a lot of work in India and Africa in the sense that she's been putting a lot of money into building a pedagogical project. I think what she calls it is the need for aesthetic preparation for ethical epistemic production. One manifestation of that is, I think, again, I'm not sure exactly of the geographical exact specific location, but somewhere on the border of Bengal, Jharkhand, and Chhattisgarh, Spivak has been building and has been working with training teachers and trying to build a school of sorts. And she's been winning all of these really big grants and awards. Recently, the Holberg Prize and the Kyoto Prize, which is $500,000, $630,000, and most of that has been donated to these spaces where she's been doing work. She's also, I think, done a lot of work in different African nations. So I do think that one of the first critiques of this space is that, okay, she's talking about this particular thing called the subaltern, but the language that she uses excludes the people that she's talking about, right? And I don't think that's what she is. I don't think that the purpose of this essay, again, that's unverifiable. We don't know what the purpose of the essay is, but I don't think the purpose of the essay is just that. I do think there are some contributions that she makes which we can analyze or use or even misuse or even reject. I think my orientation today is to just open them up and to see what comes out of this conversation, right? So a little bit about the word subaltern, right? It comes from sub and alternus. Sub is meaning below, right? And alternus, the way that I read alternus in this is that to be alternative right now might seem, I mean, to think about alternative frameworks, alternative networks, alternative spaces is a more progressive, more away from mainstream connotation. The way I read alternative here, alternus here is other than primary. So below and other than primary, right? So in the sense that it is doubly away from the mainstream or from the primary. It has also become a nominalized adjective in the sense that the adjective qualifies the noun, right? So a subaltern woman, a subaltern man, a subaltern nation, a subaltern whatever, right? But recently, I think people have been using just the subaltern, right? So the adjective then stands in, it gets nominalized for a particular group or for a particular community. That is one of the ways in which people do talk about the subaltern, right? I think a good example would just be that when we talk about tall buildings, right, we say that that building is a tall building. We don't say the tall, or we don't say the short. So I think that's the way. It's also a good way to understand how this is happening. The names here that you see: Ranjit Guha, Partho Chatterjee, Gyanendra Pandey, Deepesh Chakraborty, Gyan Prakash, Gayatri Spivak, Susi Tharu, M.S. Pandian. These are the people who are associated with the Subaltern Studies group, which Subaltern Studies is also a journal that was started out of Australia by Ranjit Guha. And in the entirety of this piece, Can the Subaltern Speak? Spivak doesn't give us a working definition of who or what the subaltern is. But in a piece called Diasporas, Guha does talk about it, where he says that the subaltern are constituted as a class, as a class of those who act in favor of or in the interest of the elite, and therefore constitute a class of their own. And in this class, it's not just complete abject poverty-stricken people. He also includes peasantry and the upper middle class. It's the class that someone participates in when their actions are happening in favor of or in the interest of the elite. I think Spivak complicates this further as saying that she cannot read these acts as their own when they are signed in the interest of the other. Right? I think that's the contribution that she's making, and we'll see if that holds or not. I also think that every theory has its own exemplar, and it might work for that exemplar. It may not work for another exemplar. That's the way theory works, right? Like you have a theory, and then you have a couple of examples solidifying or as evidences for the working of the theory. But it is not the case that it is not the case that the theory may work for other examples. Spivak's theory might work for the example she uses, which is the suicide of Bhubaneswari Bhaduri. At the end, we'll get to that, which she talks about at the end of the piece. It may not work. So this whole idea of subaltern speaking or not may not work for other examples, right? So that's just something that I wanted to say. Yeah, and it's a really difficult essay for me to read. It's very dense. You have to follow the footnotes to the end. And there are about 112, 130, or 122 footnotes. It's very difficult to really make sense of it. And I was wondering if there were a couple of phrases that could show us the thread of the argument that she's making in this essay. And these are the things that I think that for me are that constitute this thread for me, right? Which is subject formation of subject constitution, representation, and failure of representation. Okay, I think at this point, let me just quickly stop sharing this bit and then share the. Yeah, can someone? So I can't see the screen right now because I'm sharing my entire screen. Can someone just unmute and tell me if they can see if they can see this?
Yeah, it's visible. We can see.
Okay, so I think that in the first 2 or 3 pages itself. So again, here I'll start now reading these 25 passages that I've pulled out, and we'll see how much time and how it goes. If I do think that I'm going over time, I might skip a couple of passages, and then maybe in the Q&A we can take up the bits that I've skipped. I think in the first sentence itself, Spivak has set out, or is writing about what she's setting out to do, where women outside the mode of production narrative mark the points of fade out in the writing of disciplinary history, even as they mime writing as such, footprints of the trace that efface as they disclose, right? So she's talking about very specific women who are outside the mode of production narrative, which is outside, I would say, the Marxist model of representation. It is these women who mark the points of fade out in the writing of disciplinary history, right? And disciplinary history, the way that I read that, is history as a discipline that is taught that is institutionally taught, because disciplines are institutional formation. So she's clearly responding to institutions that teach writing history. And then she goes on to say that these women are insufficiently represented or representable in that narration, the narration of the mode of production narrative. We can docket them, but we cannot grasp them at all. Or to tease out Marx rather than follow Jameson, the mode of production narrative is so efficient because it is constructed in terms of the most efficient and abstract coding of value, the economic. Thus, to represent an earlier intuition, the ground level value coding that write these women's lives elude us. We pay the price of epistemically fractured transcoding when we explain them as general exemplars of anthropological descriptions. And here, I want to go to the footnote, and I want us to read this particular line, which I will come back to at the end, where she's mentioning all of these narratives, Rigoberta Menchú, Rani of Srimor, and then she says they must exceed the system to come to us in the mode of the literary. So I think this is one of the only mentions of the mode of the literary that she, in this essay, not that many others, and we'll talk about the mode of literary at the end of this thing. But I think it's this, her essay is actually cautioning historians and not literary studies people. So if the ground level value codings are not part of the mode of production narrative, so if they are not, if they cannot be abstracted by the coding of value as use value and exchange value, the codes are, and these codes are then only measurable by the ebb and flow mode of the total or expanded form, which is defective from a rationalist point of view. If the ground level value codings of these women outside the mode of production narrative are defective from a rationalist point of view, then rationalist theory cannot help us. That's, I think, one of the first moves that she's making. And then she goes on to say that some of the most radical criticism coming out of the West in the 80s, and then she's going to go on to talk about Foucault and Deleuze, was the result of an interested desire to conserve the subject of the West, or the West as subject. The theory of pluralized subject effects often provided a cover for the subject knowledge. So even the most radical criticism coming out of the West for Spivak, and by this she means Foucault and Deleuze, end up presenting the West as subject. And the way she does this, the way she's saying that this happens, is that throughout history, for history to happen, whether it's a top-down history or a bottom-up history, or even if you think that it's a outward spiral moving upward or downward, history needs to have a subject. It needs to be speaking about someone. This is the sovereign subject of history or even philosophy. There are different formulations and conceptions of the sovereign subjects. Descartes has one, Merleau-Ponty has another, Hobbes, Locke have other conceptualizations. And I think what Foucault and Deleuze are doing are that they are critiquing the Western sovereign subject. And in their radical critique of the Western sovereign subject, they themselves are, according to Spivak, ma'am, yeah.
Ipshita ma'am, your hand is raised. Do you want to say something?
Hang on, I can't lower it. That's the problem. I do want to say something, but later on. I consider it lowered. Carry on. Sorry.
Okay. Oh, no worries, ma'am. Yeah. Let me go back to sharing my screen. Yeah.
Yeah, the sovereign subject. That is what I wanted to say. No, you carry on from there.
Right. So Spivak's intervention is that Foucault and Deleuze are critiquing the sovereign subject, and even in their critique of the sovereign subject, they make mistakes. The way Deleuze does that, according to Spivak, is Deleuze's reference to the worker struggle is equally problematic. It is obviously a genuflection. A genuflection is like I think, a bending of the knee it stands in for high reverence. So he ends up romanticizing the struggle of workers, and here this bit: the invocation of the worker struggle is baleful in its very innocence. It is incapable of dealing with global capitalism. The subject production of worker and unemployed within nation state ideologies in its center, the increasing subtraction of the working class in the periphery from the realization of surplus value, and thus from humanistic training in consumerism, and all of these other bigger, larger things that she's talking about here. She's saying that Deleuze does not consider this, right? And with Foucault, she's making the same argument that Deleuze and Foucault don't consider ideology or imperialism like higher overarching narratives that continue to mediate and influence the counter subject that they are talking about. Let me just check my time. Okay. So she goes on to say that this parasubjective matrix, cross-hatched with heterogeneity, surreptitiously ushers in the unnamed subject, at least for those intellectual workers influenced by the new hegemony of pure catachresis. By this, what I understand is that the unnamed subject of counter-subject, I mean, I'm calling it counter-subject just for the sake of distinguishing it with the sovereign subject of the West, which would probably be could be attributed to Enlightenment humanism, or even Descartes' cogito. So this counter subject still remains unnamed. It's not racially marked. It's not gendered. It's not geopolitically spaced. That's the critique that Spivak's trying to make. And then she says, it is not surprising, therefore, that upon the empirical register of resistance talk, Foucault articulates another corollary of the disavowal of the role of ideology in reproducing the social relations of production, an unquestioned valorization of the oppressed as subject, the object being, as Deleuze admiringly remarks, to establish conditions where prisoners themselves would be able to speak. So her articulation is that Foucault, he talks about the clinic, the hospital, the prison, the mental asylum, and these microcosms. And in doing so, in this empirical register of the resistance talk, and it's empirical because it's anthropologically verifiable. That is, does this asylum really exist? Are these people, are these inmates, whatever, it's verifiable in that sense. Right. And after this, she talks about representation and how Foucault and Deleuze are representing these people. And here she goes on to talk about two modes of representation. One is vertreten, the other one's darstellen and vertreten. One is a speaking for, right? So if I'm representing, let's say, a particular institution, if I was to recruit someone into that institution and I say that I'm representing this institution, I'm speaking on behalf of this institution, so I'm speaking for them. So that's one mode of representation, one way of representation. Another one is to represent something, is to tell someone else's story, but it is me who's doing the telling. So I'm representing it to you. And if I try to make myself transparent, for Spivak, and she goes on to say this later on, we'll read it, that transparency marks the space of interest. And she gets this from Marx, from reading the 18th Brumaire, and I would like us to quickly watch like 2 minutes of a video of her talking in one of these older lectures that she gave, which may clarify a little bit about what this, I can assure you, two modes of representation are. Can you just clarify once more if you can hear this? That what you will observe is a...
Yes, Chinmay.
Okay. Yes, it's audible.
All right, just a bit.
recognize. Let me say now, as a comparativist, and you mentioned my recent book, that it is mistranslated in the best English translations, okay? In the sentence before, in the best English translations, it is said, they are therefore the old independent, small peasant proprietors who had lost their classness because of the slow transition from feudalism to whatever. They were therefore incapable of asserting their class interest in their own name. Whereas in the German, it is, ihr Klasseninteresse im eigenen Namen geltend zu machen, to make their interest count. In other words, to have what they are saying be recognized as such. That was the problem which got lost in translation, as it were. It's not a question of asserting anything. It was a question of not being, it wasn't like, it was not in the currency, the sign system, that idea of value, not value in the Marxian sense, but, you know, like passing, that kind of thing, gelten.
Right, so now we've come to this point where she's saying that I think that clarifies a little bit about who this subaltern is. In this essay, it's not, again, I'm not trying to rescue Spivak, I'm not trying to defend Spivak, I'm just trying to critically follow what she's trying to say, and then we'll see if it works or not, right? It's not a question of asserting anything, it's not a question of speech. It's a question of whether that assertion can be heard as that assertion or not. Right, so we'll go back to reading a couple of more passages, and then we can yeah, okay. So that was a little bit on Marx and Foucault and Deleuze. And then she says, it is in the shadow of this unfortunate marionette that the history of the unheeded subaltern must unfold. That with the coding that, or registers of Deleuze and Foucault, it is only in the shadow of those registers in which that the history of this unheeded subaltern must unfold. Right, so she's making another move here where she's talking about the relationship between global capitalism, nation-state alliances, is so macrological that it cannot account for the micrological texture of power, which means that there are these larger, say, movements or forces of capital and ideology that are at play, that micrological accounts of the clinic or of the hospital or of the mental asylum may not, that micrological texture the macrological cannot account for the micrological, sub-individual micrological categories cannot grasp the empirical field. So to move towards such an accounting, one must move towards theories of ideologies or subject formations that micrologically and often erratically operate the interests that congeal the micrologies and are congealed in macrologies. And she goes on to say that my view is that radical practice should attend to this double session of representations rather than introduce the individual subject through totalizing concepts of power and desire. It's not that you only focus on the clinic, the hospital, the mental asylum, or just that you are a subject of this larger, grander narrative of capitalism or global capital, or call it whatever. You do need to make radical practice needs to attend to these both types of representative models. We're at page 53, so we have to get to page 93 before 20 minutes. I would also like to maybe just do a little bit of also Foucault to understand some more Foucauldian moves that she's trying to make. And here's some bit of Foucault that I'd want us to read, where he's talking about the distinction between histories and genealogy. Genealogy was Foucault's method, and this much from this bit. This search is the search of history, not of genealogy. This search is directed to that which was already there. The history is directed to that which was already there. The image of a primordial truth, fully adequate to its nature, and it necessitates the removal of every mask to ultimately disclose an original identity. However, if the genealogist refuses to extend his faith in metaphysics, if he listens to history, he finds that there is something altogether different. This is Foucault's quoting Nietzsche here behind things. Not a timeless essential secret, but the secret that they have no essence, or that their essence was fabricated in a piecemeal fashion from alien forms. Examining the history of reason, he learns that it was born in an altogether reasonable fashion from chance, right? So, and if we skip to the bottom, last sentence here, what is found at the historical beginning of things is not the inviolable identity of their origin. It is the dissension of other things. It is disparity. So even when history posits this pristine, point of origin, when you do go to, when the genealogist goes there, what you find there is not this identity of the origin, but other things, right? Like there is always something more. It's a bunch of different things, the dissension of other things. So history also teaches how to laugh at the solemnities of the origin. The lofty origin is no more than a metaphysical extension which arises from the belief that things are most precious and essential at the moment of birth. I think this is a great line, which I think he's getting from Nietzsche, which is also, I think it's just a good line to also critique origin myths, which I think right now almost every political party is using in most right-wing governments in the world. Finally, he goes on to say that genealogy does not pretend to go back in time to restore an unbroken continuity that operates beyond the dispersion of forgotten things. Its duty is not to demonstrate that the past actively exists in the present, that it continues secretly to animate the present, having imposed a predetermined form to all. Genealogy does not resemble the evolution of a species and does not map the destiny of a people. So this seems very revolutionary. It sounds really revolutionary, and I do think that the object of all of this is to mine the subjugated knowledges of that were pushed or repressed by hegemonic accounts of history, right? So he says, subjugated knowledges are thus those blocks of historical knowledge which were present but disguised within the body of a functionalist and systematizing theory, and which criticism has been able to reveal. The method would be archaeology, to think of like to mine for knowledges. And I think he's doing that when he's talking about the clinic, the hospital, the mental asylum. But Spivak says that that's not enough. That is a very micrological account. You are not looking at the macrological thing. So going back to Spivak now, and finally at page 58, she says that the first part of my proposition is that the phase development of the subaltern is complicated by the imperialist project, is confronted by the subaltern studies group. So there is Foucault and Deleuze at one point who are not quite there yet for Spivak. And then there is the subaltern studies group from India who are trying to write a history of peasant insurgencies. And she says that they do get to a point which is actually theoretically which can be used. And this is because they don't make a big distinction between subject and object, like counter subject and object. So the object is neither a macrological, ideological, overarching figure of capitalism or anything else, and neither is it a micrological account of any particular anthropologically verifiable institution. It's rather both, where they go on to say that Guha constructs a definition of the people that can only be an identity indifferential. And then he classifies, there is a classification he makes where there are dominant foreign groups, but there are also dominant indigenous groups at the all India and at the regional and local levels representing the elite. So it's not just the West and India, but even in India, there is the dominant indigenous, and then there is subaltern classes. And these subaltern classes in Guha's writing go in and out of subalternity, right? So in subaltern studies, because of the violence of the imperialist epistemic, social, and disciplinary inscription, a project understood in essentialist terms must bring in a radical textual practice of differences. This is what she's saying that the subaltern studies group is doing. Sorry, let me just check the time. Okay. For the gender unspecified true subaltern group, whose identity is its difference, there is no unrepresentable subaltern subject that can know and speak itself. The intellectual solution is not to abstain from representation. The problem is that the subject's itinerary has not been left traced so as to offer an object of seduction to the representing intellectual. In the slightly dated language of the Indian group, the question becomes, how can we touch the consciousness of the people, even as we investigate their politics? With what voice consciousness can the subaltern speak? The move that she's going to make after this is that she reads a subaltern woman as the space of, as her counter subject. So this subject is geopolitically located, it is gendered, it is not just geopolitically located, but it's also part of a particular political narrative that was ongoing at that time. This is the suicide of Bhuvaneshwari Baduri, right, towards the end. Where she says that within the phased itinerary of the subaltern subject, the track of sexual difference is double phased. That even inside the subaltern subject, when you track in sexual difference is doubly phased. So there is dominant social group, dominant indigenous group, and then there is subaltern subject, and then there is sexed subaltern difference. So the question is not of female participation in insurgency or the ground rules of sexual division of labor, for both of which there is evidence. It is rather that both as object of colonialist historiography and as subject of insurgency, the ideological construction of gender keeps the male dominant. Even when the female is part of the insurgency or when it is the object of colonialist historiography, it is still the male that is dominant in these speaking fors, if that makes sense. So Deleuze and Foucault ignored both epistemic violence of imperialism, and the subaltern studies group didn't, because they were the victims in the sense that the country that they're coming from, India, was the victim of imperialism, and and also the international division of labor would matter less if they did not in closing touch on third world issues. So Deleuze and Foucault do touch on third world issues, but they do so in closing, and the way they do so is that right, just give me a minute. Okay, I seem to have lost that one paragraph, but Deleuze and Foucault talk about the third world, but they talk about the third world that is adjacent to empire, right? So they touch upon it, and insofar as they talk about the third world, they talk about it only as the thing that can be accessible by empire because of geographical proximity. This is finally the second bit of the essay, which starts with, can the subaltern speak, right? Here she's saying that I'm asking the question of the gendered subaltern woman as subject, not as my friend Jonathan Culler somewhat tendentially suggests, trying to produce difference by differing or to appeal to a sexual identity defined as essential and privileging experiences associated that with identity. So she's not talking about identity politics. She's talking about subaltern women just as subject. I think that's an important qualification to make, because then the moment you start talking about, the moment you name difference, are you naming it as an identity or are you naming it as a relation? That's a critical move. I think one would have to qualify, and I think that's what she's doing here. Right, so then we do go to sati, and I'm sure we all know about this practice. In conclusion, what she's going to say is that the woman who immolates herself on the pyre of her dead husband is either saved by the British, who think that sati is not a civilized practice, or that she has to do this for her dead husband, right? So in between these two particular narratives, the subaltern woman's voice is lost, is what Spivak's going to go ahead and say. So the subaltern's utterance is always mediated through epistemic codes or state archives or ethnographic translations or colonial or patriarchal discourses. Every attempt to recover this subaltern voice ends up reinscribing the graphimatic conditions of representation that efface the voice. And graphimatic is important because she reads speech as graphimatic. And this is a profoundly Derridian register, in the sense that writing would have to be known as durable, would have to be maybe understood as durable marks on durable surfaces. So it's not just language. It could also be a gesture. It could be a cut. It could be incision. It could be, a painting. Just a mark. That's the way in which that she's thinking about writing and this thing. Finally, there's this bit that she says that it was not heard, it remained in the space of the different. This is also, I think, an important concept. Where she says, obviously, I'm not advocating the killing of widows. I'm suggesting that within the two contending versions of freedom, the constitution of the female subject in life is the place of the different. The different, I think, occurs when a subject suffers an injury or a wrong, but lacks the idiom to phrase that injury or to articulate that injury. I might, again, I haven't finished reading Lyotard's Different, but I do think this is basically what he's saying. Please correct me if I'm wrong. It's when a subject is injured and is compelled to use the idiom of the oppressor to sort of articulate that injury, right? So the subaltern is the subject position structurally located in the different, where the idioms of colonial power and Western theory cannot register her utterance as a phrase with force. This is why the widow's suicide in the Sati debates become the paradigmatic case. So it's British colonial discourse reads Sati as barbarism, and Brahminical patriarchy reads it as ritual duty. In between these two representational models, the woman's own motive, whatever it may have been, cannot appear as an authorized phrase within either code. Right? This is what Spivak's saying. I just wanted to make that clear. So the space of the subaltern is then the space of the different, where her utterance is always overwritten, where her speech is translated into people's idioms, where the trace of her intention is displaced by the graphematics of colonial and patriarchal representation, is what I have written down. I think I'll end in 5 minutes. There is also this last bit that she does. Here, so where she says, between patriarchy and imperialism, subject constitution, and the object formation, the figure of the woman disappears, not into a pristine nothingness, but into a violent shuttling, which is the displaced figuration of the third world woman. So when and I think figuration is an important word there, because this is a figurative economy, in the sense that there might have, I think what she's responding to is historians who read this sort of a subaltern woman or a subaltern man, or whatever the object of study it is, that particular subject gets figured into as third world woman or third world man. But the third world woman, third world man, who is often a native informant in the West, is so much more different than the actual subaltern. Excuse me. Finally, she goes on to talk about this controversial title of this essay, right? So she says, I was so unnerved by this failure of communication that in the first version of this text, I wrote, in the accents of passionate lament, the subaltern cannot speak. It was an inadvisable remark. Right? The failure of this communication, what she's talking about here, is Bhuvaneshwari Baduri hung herself. Let me just read that bit out. So this woman hung herself, but she had to hang herself. She waited until she was menstruating to hang herself. And she only did that because because she suspected that if she hung herself when she was not menstruating, her death also would have been read in a patriarchal narrative, the narrative of that, she hung herself because of an illegitimate pregnancy, like an extra, quote unquote, illegitimate pregnancy, an extramarital thing. But she had to she waited until she was menstruating and then hung herself, so that even in death, that patriarchal interpretation would not happen, because, well, she was menstruating. This was the failure of communication that that she was so unnerved by. I think there's also one quick bit of another quick video that I want to show. But as I said, this is my following of her argument. I'm not a Spivakian scholar. I don't, this places where she's referred to Kant and Hegel. I haven't read enough Kant and Hegel, so I can't comment on that. I do want to know what everyone thinks about it is, but this bit of the trace at the beginning that she talks about and the literary mode is something that I'll just speak in the next 5 minutes and we'll wrap up. So for the trace, I thought it might be important to see this video of Geoffrey Bennington, who's just been working on Derrida for most of his life, right? And I find that there is a particular bit in this video which helped me understand this notion of trace in a clear fashion. Right?
Chinmay, I can't hear it.
Oh, wait, sorry.
Is claiming.
Yeah, it's fine now.
If we're lucky, maybe the trace will appear. Okay, I'm going to simplify this outrageously and use as an analogy for how this thought works. I'm going to use the letters of the alphabet as an analogy for the language system as a whole. Right? This is something Saussure does in a somewhat non-reflective way when he's trying to explain his differences without positive terms view of language. He says you can write the letters any which way as long as they remain differentiated from each other, but there's no substantial elements of them that make them the letters that they are. So I'm going to take that seriously and think about the letters of the alphabet, see if we can make one come up. So here's the letter B. I'll let you guess later why I choose the letter B rather than the letter A, for example. How do we know it's a B? How do we know it's a B? What is it? What grants the B its B-ness, if you like, rather than it just being an arrangement of lines on a white background? Well, story goes, it's a B because it takes its place in a structure of difference or of referral, whereby the B-ness of the B emerges from its differential relations with all the other elements in the system. So even here, when it's written alone in all its apparently shining presence, the B is a B rather than just some squiggle because of all the other letters that are not here present. But once that's the case, then the absence of all the other letters is in a sense present here too. The absence of an A, C, D and the rest is in a sense right here, constituting the B-ness of the B. Derrida is going to want to say that the present element, the B, bears the trace of the absence of all the other elements that allow it to shine forth as the B that it is. You can't see or otherwise intuit those traces, which is why this is somewhat bogus, what we're doing here. They're not, the traces themselves are not objects of experience. The trace of the absence of the other elements is not present in the sense of a possible intuitable content. Right? They're presenting themselves in the dissimulation of themselves. Right? The trace of the absence of all the others presents itself by not presenting itself. Right? It does not come forth. But the bee wouldn't be a bee without those traces. But that must mean that the absent elements that allow the bee to be a bee aren't simply or straightforwardly absent. They're not just absent. They're right here in their absence, as it were. They're busy, I'm tempted to say, busy as bees, making the bee a bee.
Okay. So quickly going back to that first quote and the bit about the mode of the literary, right? And then I'll be done in like 3 minutes. Sorry, Shachi, if this is going on for too long.
No, and I think you can take 5 to 8 more minutes if you have more to say. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, so this trace, I mean, that bit of Geoffrey Bennington helped me understand this bit more. And we go back to this first paragraph, and I'd like to read it out again. Women outside the mode of production narrative mark the points of fade out in the writing of disciplinary history, even as they mime writing as such footprints of the trace that efface as they disclose. If, as Jameson suggests, the mode of production narrative is the final reference. These women are insufficiently represented or representable in that narration. We can docket them, but we cannot grasp them at all. The possibility of possession of being haunted is cut by the imposition of the tough reasonableness of capital's mode of exploitation. Or to tease out Marx rather than follow Jameson, the mode of production narrative is so efficient because it is constructed in terms of the most efficient and abstract coding of value, which is the economic. Thus, to represent an earlier intuition, the ground level value codings that write these women's lives elude us. These codes are measurable only in the ebb and flow mode of the total or expanded form, which is defective from a rationalist point of view. We pay the price of epistemically fractured transcoding when we explain them as general exemplars of anthropological distinctions, going back to that footnote. So these people then must exceed the system to come to us in the mode of the literary. I think why she uses in the mode of the literary, or this is my reading, is because the mode of the literary gives you the person or a person and not a concept. So it gives you thatness and not whatness, being and not essence. I don't know if this is a rescue, if this is a reading that rescues Spivak or whatever. I'm not interested in defending or approving of this, but I do think these are questions that, as scholars of literary studies, that are pertinent to our methodology and to what we do. That what does this mode of literary give us that exemplars of anthropological descriptions do not? I think that's it. I think I just ended there. Thank you very much for listening to me, and thank you for bearing with my horrible reading. I think I misread so many of these lines. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Chinmay, for this reading. And as you said, it's your own reading and critical reflection on the essay. I'm sure people will have questions based on their own readings or listening to what you have said here. If anyone has questions, you can raise your hands or type in the chat box. Meanwhile, I was also reminded of Raymond Williams' structures of feeling when you were talking about this difference between history and literary, and how literary can help us go where history cannot, where we have set definitions of or concepts of experiences, but literature can help us, or literary works can help us reach those experiences rather than going there through concepts or structures. We have a question. Do you want to read it or?
Yeah, I'd like to read that. And also, thank you, Shachi. Yeah. So Carlota says, I'm wondering if I could expand a little on what I mean by person in the literary mode as opposed to concept. Thank you for that question. I think one way to answer that question would be that the way language works in literature, or one way that language works in literature, is that or if we were to determine between literary discourse and non-literary discourse, right? Literary mode and non-literary mode, although discourse and mode are completely different things. But if we were to distinguish between these two areas, in a non-literary discourse, right? Language is used with and I'm quoting from a philosopher some of us know here, and whose work we've read. This is Syed Saeed, and I'm talking about this from Being Seen Through Literature, this essay that some of us have read. He says that in the non-literary discourse, we use the economy of language is an economy of frugality, in the sense that it is used to convey the message. It is used to just communicate. In literature, however, and in using to communicate, in using when language is used to communicate, you don't really need to get to the specifics of things, or think of a washing machine manual or a instruction manual to build a fridge or a TV or this, that. No matter what language it is in, whether English, Spanish, French, Kannada, German, whatever, it will pretty much be doing the same thing, that to pick up a screw, put it in, pick up the right. Whereas in the literary, in a literary mode, language works on a different economy, and it's not that it is really embellished or very. It's not that there's a lot. It's not the complete opposite of economy. It's maybe the principle that governs literary language is richness, and insofar as it is richness, it is richness insofar as it is able to tease out a particular screw or a particular TV or a particular, that sort of a thing. I hope this makes sense. It's not concerned with the TV, it's concerned with a TV. Yeah. But I do think that there are better readings of that, maybe a person and not the person. Yeah. Yeah. If anyone else would like to add to this bit or agree or disagree with this, please feel free to chime in anyway. Yeah. Ma'am, you had something to say earlier.
Yeah, sorry. I was hoping someone else would say it. And I'm still hoping.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions or observations? Anything anyone would like to add?
Even if anyone would not like to add, I think there should be questions and observations and whatever else. Good.
Chinmay, am
ma'am.
I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. So I missed, the beginning part because of the connection problem. But see, my my basic question is that when I am doing literary studies and I am doing, a close reading of Spivak's, this particular essay or maybe any other writing, And you do talk about, because talk about all the reports, maybe the syllabus, that when we talk about the practice of comparative literature, the academic comparative literature, we do talk about different schools, like the ACLA reports, where say that as the like that when we are thinking uh, Haba, then say the and report and social report, that everywhere onwards we are looking at the that the identity study, post-colonial, and when we are third world perspective, we do talk about Bhabha and Spivak.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry. Is it just me, or can others also? Because I can't hear.
Voice is breaking in between.
Well, I think
Ma'am,
probably the name. Okay,
it's fine. Can you also type your question once you complete? Just in short.
Shashi, you want to read out Ankit's comment?
Yeah, by then I'll read the next question. So Ankit is saying, hi, thank you for your reading of the essay. It is nice for people engaging with one of the most cited essays of post-colonial theory. I just wanted to know what would be your thought on the criticism it has received from recent scholars of critical caste studies. For example, one of the leading proponents of critical caste studies, anthropologist Gajendra Rai, has not shied away from denouncing these theories. He has variously called Gayatri Spivak's essay Can the Subaltern Speak a horrible text, a notorious piece, and a joke. He points out that Spivak very casually uses a phrase like learned Brahmin, that is contradictory, that is an oxymoron. You cannot be learned and be a casteist.
Yeah, I agree, but I have met a lot of quote unquote learned people who are also casteist. So unless we're seeing them as mutually exclusive, that if you are casteist, then you cannot be learned. That, I guess I could, I mean, who am I to, but like, I guess we could grant that. But I have also met so-called learned people who are also casteist. And in that sense, I would not exclude the two. I would hold the two in contradiction, or I would see that people who do know things may not actually understand the things that they know, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Ankit? Can deconstruction account for material suffering, or does it annul it in textual play? Spivak's Marxist and feminist threading answers by turning the question inward, yet stays complicit. How would you address it? Can you clarify with what stays complicit in Spivak's threading? Ishita? Ankit, I'm also curious to know what you think. What do you think?
Ankit, if you're here, you may unmute. And Ishita, would you like to clarify? She says the theoretical practice itself and the critic who deploys these tools.
Yeah,
so,
thank you.
do you want me to read the question again?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Can deconstruction account for material suffering, or does it annul it in textual play? Spivak's Marxist and feminist threading answers by turning the question inward, yet stays complicit. How would you address it?
So I'm not sure I understand your question completely. And I don't know if I can answer if deconstruction can account for material suffering. But I do think that deconstruction is not like a theory to be applied. I think Derrida's point was that it's always happening, and that you can just sort of make that happening, render that happening perceivable by staging a reading of the text. Does that make sense? Right, but that doesn't answer your second question, which I didn't understand completely. So the theoretical practice itself of what? Like, is this of deconstruction? And the critic who deploys these tools. So I would say that the critic can't deploy deconstruction. It's not something to be applied to a text.
I think she's also talking about Marxist and
yeah. I don't know in terms of inward, because there is, I glossed over a lot because it's a 65, 70 page piece. There's a big section where she does talk about global capital. She does talk about the Rigved, Brahminical patriarchy, and all of that. So I don't know, though. I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know if anyone else can answer that.
Did Shoma write her question?
No, ma'am, not yet.
Okay. I hope she is, though.
Yeah.
She did.
Okay, I'll read it out. Why are we doing a close reading of Spivak? We come across the categories such as identity studies, post-colonial studies, multiculturalism, and they are part of larger socio-cultural politics in a specific moment. Spivak's theoretical perspective is coming in a specific historical moment and part of a larger academic politics.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree. And why are we doing a close reading of Spivak? I don't know. I think that if we were to cancel Spivak, if we were to say that this is, I'm sure that is, I'm not against cancellation or just not engaging. I think non-engagement with this piece is also a response. But I do think that people have written controversial things. A reading of them can offer space for scholarly engagement. Like we read Aristotle, we read or we read Heidegger, for example, who was a Nazi sympathizer, who held the card was a card-holding member of the Nazi Party. So I do think that reading such people, I don't only read these people. I'm not trying to defend myself, but I do think that reading these people is productive, is what I'm trying to say. And it's not the only productive that there is, obviously.
Yeah. So there's,
someone else had also raised their hand.
Yeah, Shubhi and Shomadi. And Shreya Dash.
Okay, so we can go in order. Shoma ma'am, do you want to try unmuting your mic once again?
I think Shoma ma'am just put up what value is she adding to your reading. Ma'am, I think that's for you to answer, no ma'am, because I don't cite this essay usually. I just encounter it quite a lot. Everyone is citing it for some reason. I thought it might be good to see what is so good about it. I don't really use it in my work, really.
No. I'm kind of forced to interrupt everybody, and I'm really sorry, because it comes from what you said. I think the question Shoma is asking is, what value are you adding to her? That is the question even I would like to ask. And I think that is something which all of us are trying to ask you.
Right. So what
in our different ways.
Yeah.
You take the other ones because they come from all different perspectives, And I think it's very educative in that sense. But they all add up to this question. What value are you adding to it? So, I mean, I agree that you don't have to cancel anybody, quite the opposite. And you don't have to counter anybody either. That is another discourse that is going on. All one is asking is that you read. That is, I think, what was meant by that question about, the critic herself and the theory and how is she complicit. And I agree completely that she is.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, no, sorry. Yeah, just answer the rest.
Okay, Shreya's question is, Chinmay, could you please tell us how would one read this essay situated in a comparative literature classroom outside India, while keeping in mind that one is supposed to ethically engage with the other through the lens of comparative literature? Do you think Spivak is essentially doing that through the essay? I do not. I don't think that she's doing that through the essay. How is it? How would one read this in a classroom outside India? I guess it's. I mean, I understand what you're asking. It's usually on the syllabi of every sort of third world or post-colonial studies or world literature syllabi. So, here, even sometimes in translation studies syllabi, complete syllabi. I think it's usually met with a lot of critique, which justifiably so, obviously, and I'm on that side, just to make that clear. Yeah, I think people don't. A lot of people do not like Spivak here as well, but there are a lot of people who do. So I've been in part of classrooms that have been very.
Ipshana, are you saying something?
I haven't said anything yet. Let him finish what he's saying.
No,
because sorry, did something happen?
No, since you since you unmuted your mic, there was some disturbance coming from your end.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, I just think that I've been part of classrooms where the classroom then becomes a very like a fixed side. That there is a faction that is for Spivak, there's a faction against Spivak. Then it becomes it does become very personal as well. I've been in part of some of those classrooms. I don't know if that completely answers your question, Shreya. But what value am I adding to this piece is that I usually don't engage with it. I usually don't cite it. I don't give it that, citational power, I guess. But if I were to do so, I would qualify and I would question some of the moves that she's making. But again, I still do hold that there is a lot I haven't read. And I don't know if that, that's it. Yeah.
Shubhi, do you want to unmute?
Shubhi.
Sure. I am going to be quick. Do not want to take a lot of the floor, but just one comment, which is in response to Shoma ma'am's. I think, Chinmay, the way I was understanding the question was that considering we are having a gathering here, we are reading Spivak. So what exactly it is that you are directing our attention towards? So how your reading is adding or extending the discussion that's already happening in the essay. Because like you said, we have been reading this essay, people have been citing this essay, but why this gathering, why this conversation? What is it that, is there a particular purpose with which you began reading this essay? Like, was there a thought process? Which was something that I was waiting to ask. And my second question, which leads to the first one, is that in your entire presentation, I was wondering, in your entire reading rather, I was wondering if you spent some time on how Spivak is discussing the influence of ideology, which in her critique, she is a little critical of how Foucault and Deleuze both are not taking into account in how it is producing the problem that she is critiquing is being produced. I was just thinking, how were you thinking about ideology's function in the essay? And
yeah, I think I think that ideology, the way she's talking about ideology, is metaphorical. I don't know what she means by it. She says that Foucault doesn't think about ideology, or Deleuze doesn't think about ideology. But what is ideology? I know that she does quote Althusser, and there are some footnotes in which where she does mention it, but I don't think there's an explicit mention of her stance on it. So I think that's a position for her that can and should be, that we can and should attack or critique. Why are we gathering here and why are we speaking about this? I was just interested in the literary mode, and I was just interested in why certain things exceed anthropological descriptions. And I was wondering if I want to ask people what they think about that.
Why did you need Spivak to do that?
I didn't need Spivak to do that. I was reading Spivak and then she said it, but I think that she's contradicting herself, which is why I thought it was a good thing to talk about.
Did you tell us that she's contradicting herself?
I did not.
So then I think that is what we were all trying to ask you. What value did you add to this?
Yeah.
And one more thing, which I think is necessary to reflect upon if we are going to do these things. It is very necessary to read certain things. There is no doubt about that. Those certain things are decided by us. They are decided by the institution. And whether we read them with the institution or against the institution is a choice that is left to us. It does not depend upon whether we, I'm sorry to say it, and I'm 100% certain that, it's going to cause a lot of reflection. But, camps in a classroom ought not to be decided by whether we like a person or not. Just as they ought not to be decided by whether we dislike them and decide to cancel them. And I think that this entire exercise was located just there. That it is not whether we like or dislike, it is not whether we cancel or don't cancel. Then it is about our reading, which is something that we know you have. And I personally was interested in finding out how it was working. Because, just by the simple twist of fate, this particular writer herself has done me the honor and privilege of acknowledging in writing that I'm one of the 2 people in the world who has understood her until 2006. So I was very curious to, understand what it is that she thought that I understood. And I thought that you would help me in finding out what it was. And I think that you could have, if it was possible to read it, What she says about A, B, C, and D is her reading of A, B, C, and D. And one of the reasons, and I say this from experience, one of the reasons why it is an unteachable thing is because she's talking a particular jargon that is just being formed. That is one of the things that Shoma was talking about in American academia at a particular time. So that needs location. The fact that was pointed out that she's basically cast blind. That needs location because all of this forms her argument. Also, what Derrida is engaging with is incidentally phenomenology. And that is why I go back to that little point that it does not matter whether we like X or Y. That is not the reason why we read them. So, Derrida is engaging with Heidegger directly, metaphorically. which is something that you pointed out. But we needed to question you to say, for you to say that, which is something which I would have really loved you to say right at the beginning, because I'm aware that you're able to. And I mean, this is going to be sounding like a thesis defense. So I'll just stop there.
No, I agree. I also wanted to take that route to quickly say at the beginning, but it's precisely because of my current engagement with this particular piece that has made it very do you like her, do you not like her, that those debates. I wanted to evade those, not to evade my position, but to evade falling into that particular inevitable very fixed sides.
Then I will make it sound like a thesis defense and say that that is something that should have come across in your reading, that it is not about liking or not liking. And I mean,
I did say that at the beginning. I did say that at the beginning.
No. That what you say, well, then I will only say that the language will betray you every single time. That is unfortunate, but it is a fact that we have to face. Unless, I mean, actually, it was from the point of the sovereign subject that I picked it up. Merleau-Ponty does not talk about sovereign subjects. And there we go back to phenomenology.
Yeah.
The subject that she is talking about here is a historically located subject which comes from the entire post-structuralist situation. So from the post-structuralist situation located in American academia, writing in English with a Brahmin title, and I will not go into the nitty-gritties of the education because, I mean, now something is very current in our country at the moment, and that is Macaulay. Okay. So, a reference to that is quite enough. So all of that creates the position that, has led to people criticizing her as casteist or whatever, because all of that is true. And then when we are using theory, also when we are understanding, and I think that is the question that came up regarding, the theorist and the position that she takes. And I agree with you as well as with the question that deconstruction cannot fix anything, which is why we need, well, I say we need being, for example, existence. And the whole story is that she's grasping towards that. And she does not have the vocabulary. Unfortunately, her position does not give her the advantage of being able to see it. And that is a very harsh judgment. But as I said, I mean, she seems to agree with my reading. So, and it's got, again, nothing to do about whether I like or do not like her, because I'm certain that being noticed by her, and I say this now at the age of 65, must have done me some good somewhere. So there is nothing not to like, if we, bring it down to that. But if we are talking about critical theory, then we are talking about taking a position. There is no defense. I mean, even if you articulate your defense, everything else will give you away. And I'm really glad that in one sense you've provided this situation where it is possible to read a text. Just, read an essay for the sake of understanding what that person is saying, which is what we mean by reading, actually. That our interaction, where we are, who we are, and who is this person. It is very necessary. I think it will contribute to this fact that she set up a comparative literature department on the basis of designating that this discipline is dying.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, just respond to Shubhi. Yes, I really like that essay, Shubhi. I have read it. Thank you.
We also have a question by Sanjukta. She's saying, what kind of framework did she propose?
I don't know if it's a proposition or of a kind of reading, Sanjukta. Like I think she's reading that death as something than proposing that, but yeah.
We also have another comment by Peter Zorin Priya here. Yes, I believe that putting this piece into context differs in different social contexts. The subaltern subject shifted. Anyone else? Do we have any more questions? I don't see any raised hands here. Chinmay, is there something you would like to? Something. Okay, we have something by Ishita. I do not seek an answer, but no, Spivak's ideology isn't simply metaphoric. Her style is dense, figurative, and Derridian. She calls her stance a practical Marxist, feminist, deconstructionist. The point is the politics of representation and the ethics of reading across power. Reducing her project to metaphor misses the point. The metaphoric surface is the vehicle, the cargo is stubbornly historical and material. But just like a vehicle must navigate roads shaped by real terrain, history, and power.
Ishita, I agree. I didn't reduce her project to a metaphor. I said that in fact, this is exactly what I was saying, that the way Spivak is using ideology, like her accusation of against Deleuze and Foucault, works in the sense that it's metaphoric in its operation, right? It stands in for something which she doesn't quite explicitly say. And I think that's a point which we can say that, okay, wait, what are you saying? You're using all of these terminology, but what do you actually mean by this? And I know she refers to Althusser's ideology and ideological state apparatus, but I don't think she puts that to use in her accusation, like, this thing. But I completely agree with you. I do. But I don't mean to reduce this to that sort of yeah. I hope that's clear.
Anyone else? Any final questions or comments?
I think I'll just say something very obvious. And that is that, these words, ideology, and you refer to Althusser and archaeology and Foucault. These are words that are beginning to have a particular resonance at the time this is written. And that is all that is being addressed. It is being addressed within academia. And it is like, we say post-colonial and we have a whole repertoire of signification in our heads and we write around it, against it, for it, with it, or whatever. A similar thing is the case, I think, with ideology at that particular point of time. It is also the case with feminism, because parallel to this is something that develops in which, historically, there is contestation of the position that Gayatri is taking here with innumerable other non-Western women's positions, including Chandra Talpade Mohanty, who was at that point a countervailing force. Now, the thing is that in history, Chandra did not last and Spivak did. So when we are reading it today, I think the entire conceptual scope of practically every word that is being used there as for its philosophical weight. And I'm not saying theoretical purposely because it has philosophical weight. That is why I was referring to what Derrida is writing against. So when she's using representation in its two meanings, she's referring to Marx. When she is when Derrida is talking about representation, he's coming from Heidegger. And from Heidegger, there is only language that comes. From Marx, it is the forces of production, and it's a large faux pas that she places these people outside the forces of production. That is metaphorically done, actually, because these people are, everybody is within the force of, within the economy of capitalist production, especially when she's talking about Brahminical, whatever it is. It is not only a society that she's talking about at the time when this happens, which is in the early 20th century. This was not contemporary to when this essay was written, this whole Bhuvaneshwari Bhaduri debacle. So all of this, again, sorry to sound like a thesis exam, but all of this is part of locating the reading because it is purely linguistic. She is talking about language and she's trying to find a language for the people who do not speak or who do speak, but we don't have the language to hear. That is what I had understood from this. I don't know how I did it, but the entirety of the different philosophical registers that are in conversation within American academia at that point of time, including the Jeffrey Bennington's explanation. And I suggest maybe you read this chap Gasche, Gasche, who has written on Derrida, contemporary to this particular time when Gayatri is writing. Because Gayatri's writing makes Derrida available to the whole world in English because the whole world speaks English. So what we know of Derrida is unfortunately just that. So there are other people who write and who also write in English in other places. And I think we have a commitment to call it comparative literature, call it the practice of humanities, and more importantly, the pedagogy of comparative literature within humanities. We have a responsibility to do this locating for everyone else, which is why the value that you have brought to the text is possibly as important, if not more, than what I think I would have liked to answer on the basis of that. But that's the reason why we would want to read it.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. This is Rodolphe Gasche.
Yeah. This Rudolf Gasche was at FLU once upon a time. He came down, this was before all our times, but he was on campus.
Mm-hmm. I also recently, just to add to that, I also recently came across a series called by Meridian, the publisher, called Crossing Aesthetics by Abraham Torok and Nicholas Abraham and Maria Torok. And this is a series that...
So you'll need to put it somewhere so that we can all...
Yeah, I'm just putting it on, copying the... I'm actually trying to find the link so that it's easier. Okay, so Meridian. So if I'm not wrong, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind everyone that we have put up links in the chat box where you can enter your details so we can share updates about these sessions in future. And our mail ID is also there. If any one of you would like to share your work or ideas with us, you can just write to us. Sorry, Chinmay, please continue.
No, of course, yeah. No, if I'm not wrong, these two, Nicholas Abraham and Maria Torok, apparently Foucault and Derrida took classes with these two people, and then these two started this series called Crossing Aesthetics, where they've also written about all of this post-structuralist thought.
Yeah, we got that. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can stop here unless Chinmay has anything else to add. Yeah, so thank you everyone. Thank you, Chinmay, for bringing this format to our forum of reading a text like this. I think it helped make the session more engaging and more like a classroom where all of us could reflect on what to think about it, what not to think about it, or just reading difference and narrating difference, I guess. So thank you for your talk. Thank you everyone who joined and asked your questions and shared your observations. We would like you all to continue joining these sessions in future, and we hope to see you there, either as participants or as presenters. So that's it, I guess. Thank you. See you all in our next session. Thank you, Chinmay.
Thank you. No, thank you, Sachi. Thank you so much for this.